There's a common story often told to kids around campfires, lantern droids, or fusion lanterns. The story is of the First Nightsister. Allya was a former Jedi who was banished by the Order to the strange planet of Dathomir, a penal colony at the time in approximately 600 BBY. The story goes that this fallen Jedi had a unique way to manipulate the Force, which is possibly the reason for her exile. She would teach her ways to the other women, which gave birth to the Dathomirian as a people. Allya wrote a book called the Book of Law, which painted the Jedi in a bad light and indoctrinated future generations of Dathomirian witches into hating them. There are no canon sources on the contents of the book, but Legends gives us some insight. Legends seems an appropriate place to look, given that we're dissecting an in-universe legend. As I've said many times, things of this nature that don't change the overall story are fact to me until something else comes along to replace it. Legends describes the book as a moral guide for future witches and how to use their magic responsibly and sanely. Now that seems like a really suspicious word to include. Although the Jedi cast Allya out, some of the book was based on the Jedi Code. As more and more witches were trained, they split into clans. Each clan started with the same book, but like many religions, time, translations, and interpretations had each clan doing things slightly differently. Some clans went further than others, adding their own ideas and spells or changing the original message altogether. The most common addition would become the Nightsisters' Book of Shadows. This transcript of the laws ring very familiar to those who have heard the Jedi Code. It's also interesting, as we've seen the Nightsisters depicted primarily as villains in the Star Wars universe. Daughters of Allya, learn these words and learn them well, for they are the foundations that will increase your strength and keep you safe from harm. Those who suffer emotion will never enjoy peace. Those who choose ignorance will never know their own greatness. Those who yield to passion will fail to dominate. Those who fear death will never achieve pure power. Never forget that your magic must always be used wisely. Never concede to evil, lest you be consumed by it. Allya and the Nightsisters were first introduced in the 1994 novel The Courtship of Princess Leia. That novel is now Legends, but her character was named in canon in 2016. There was a magazine series called Star Wars Build the Millennium Falcon. In the 59th issue of this magazine, the ongoing series within, called Guide to the Galaxy, covered the denizens of Dathomir. Much like her book, Allya doesn't have a canon-specific story, but her Legends one is worth hearing. Allya's time was hundreds of years before the fall of the Galactic Republic. Her journey from being identified by the Order all the way to her knighthood was pretty standard. It wasn't until she was seduced by the dark side and exiled from the Order that her story gets interesting. She was sent to Dathomir, as I said, a penal colony that housed some of the galaxy's worst offenders of galactic law. The penal colony planet wasn't like the penal colonies of Earth. There wasn't structure, walls, food, or guards. It was a desolate and hopeless barren planet where the criminals roamed as free as the monsters natural to the planet. Some inhabitants were there for so long, they were the descendants of prisoners originally sent there by a long extinct empire that reigned pre-Republic. Allya used the Force to bend every thinking thing on the planet to her will, except for the Thrompath. The Thrompath were a serpent-like species that voluntarily called Dathomir home. Their serpent-shaped bodies had 6 appendages. They were ruthless warriors and had no respect for anything around them. They exploited Dathomir for hundreds of years, essentially ruining the planet. Allya was the first to do something about it. She subjugated the other prisoners and made the native raincorps her pets. She and her new allies, whether they were willing or not, drove the Thrompath from Dathomir. Allya installed herself as the head of a new matriarchal society. Men were given little power in this society, and the reasoning on men's low position isn't super clear. If I had to guess, based on everything I read, Allya would have blamed men for her exile. Maybe the Jedi Council at the time was all male. Allya birthed many daughters who were all raised as Force-wielding warriors. The Nightsisters would also let outsiders join their society if those outsiders could prove themselves. This test involved what they had learned of magic to dominate the mind of a strong-willed creature called the Sleeper. This creature was bug-like in appearance. It had light purple eyes, an armored exoskeleton, and 4 limbs. The front 2 limbs were curved and incredibly sharp. The rear 2 were tentacles that propelled the creature whether on land or in water. It resided in a pool deep within the planet. When provoked, the sleeper could emit a toxin that would cause the victim to hallucinate their deepest fears. This same toxin was part of the Nightsister test. The Nightsister undergoing the ritual would have the sleeper give up a piece of itself that would be brought back to the clan. The toxin within the piece would be boiled with water from the pool the sleeper lived in to create a key ingredient in the water of life, a literal health potion. Allya's society did very well despite the dire beginnings. It grew to the point where it made more sense for clans to break off from the main group. Women led these offshoots as well, all learning the ways of the Force and taming rancors for their own purposes. Their connection to the Force evolved over time. They started using spells and totems to enhance their abilities. Instead of calling this mystical energy field the Force, future generations called it magic, with a CK for some reason. In fact, the future generations thought magic was something of their own and not part of the Force at all. These future generations were known as the Witches of Dathomir. Allya had a change of heart when her granddaughters were born. Age, wisdom, and reflection changed her viewpoints on many things. Her daughters were strong, sure, but power-hungry and selfish. The men in their society, including Allya's own sons, were no better off than slaves. She turned back to her Jedi roots and began teaching the women how to wield their magic in ways of the light. They took to this new form of teaching surprisingly well. The Book of Law was written to cement these lessons for future generations, although that message does get a little bit lost as their magic is based in the dark side. I mentioned that Allya's story didn't have a full canon version. The legend I just told you does fit into canon, and canon sources do name Allya as the first Nightsister who trained the rest in the ways of the Force. Going forward, we're going to be discussing the Witches of Dathomir as a collective as we've seen them in canon. There are in-universe reports of contradictory stories involving Allya. The Jedi Order, for example, claims to have no record of an exiled fallen Jedi, and some clans of Nightsisters claim different origins for their way of life. This can easily explain by the council members pulling some revisionist history to hide a black mark on the Order's record. And over centuries, legends do change. Living in the United States here on Earth, there are often deeds or entire events attributed to this country's founding that are based largely in truth, but the details have been compressed and skewed over time to make it a more interesting, a more digestible story. This example spans barely more than 200 years. Imagine things 1,000 more years from now. One constant in the tale of Allya and her relation to the Nightsister culture is that she did in fact write the Book of Law. The other side of the Nightsister origin is that the Dathomirian people have direct ties to extragalactic planet of Peridia, which was also home to a culture called the Witch Kingdom of the Dathomiri. This origin says that the Dathomiri witches use their magic to control the Purgil, a vacuum species that can naturally jump through hyperspace, and that using these creatures is how the witches ended up in the primary Star Wars galaxy. Whatever the origin, and regardless of clan, there are some constants in Nightsister culture. Dathomir itself was a Force nexus. It's likely what drew the earliest witch descendants to the planet in the first place. A Force nexus is a concentration of the Force itself. Sometimes a nexus leads to light or dark more heavily one way or the other. The Dathomirian nexus is unique, possibly only in combination with how the sisters harness the Force. They are able to pull a magical ichor out of the planet, sometimes called spirit ichor. It manifests as a glowing green mist with an opaque core. Only the most powerful witches could manipulate this substance. They were known as shamans. These powerful magic users could form items out of the ichor. They could wrap it around kyber crystals, the Force-attuned stones that the Jedi used as a primary component in their lightsabers. If a kyber crystal was wrapped in this ichor, its connection to the Force would be tainted. The Nightsisters would then use the tainted crystal for their own version of a lightsaber, an actual physical sword that emitted a green smoke. These swords could stand up to a traditional Jedi's lightsaber. Now the Force is binary in light and dark, and a wielder cannot walk in both worlds. The Nightsisters were in between the two, light and dark, morally and culturally. They were not the self-serving, greedy, and power-hungry Sith, nor did they seek knowledge and to go out of their way to improve the lives of the citizens of the galaxy outside of their own social group. They didn't care about light and dark. Their only true concern was the survival and benefit of the matriarchal society. Even the men of their culture were a means to an end. While this apathy to most beings and things helped avoid the deep passion and rage that claimed the Sith, the selfishness and quest for power, along with how they wielded that power, did mean that their magic originated from the dark side of the Force. Nightsister religions had two primary deities, but the two were not worshipped at the same time. The clans worshipped one or the other. I think the clans could also have no deity, but I didn't find anything concrete one way or the other on this. They had a fanged god that was the male god of death and hunting. There was also the winged goddess, the female goddess of light, divination, and fertility. I can't imagine a matriarchal society worshipping the male deity, but he was there. Regardless of deity, the Nightsisters had specific rituals for their dead. Much of their magic was akin to necromancy, so death rituals make a lot of sense in their culture. Every dead Nightsister was mummified. The cloth was washed with the water imbued with Nightsister magic. As the cloth was prepared, the Nightsisters involved in the ceremony would chant spells of protection. The wrapped bodies were moved to cocoons of animal skin called pods. These pods would be decorated and hung on structures made from wood, bones, and shells, local to Dathomir. This was done to match the look of the trees on the planet. These twisted, spindly things with massive cocoon-shaped fruit. In the time of the Clone Wars, the Nightsisters were led by a powerful shaman called Mother Talzin. Talzin kept many traditions of the ancient order alive, though the wider galaxy influence was working its way in. A Nightsister that had gone rogue and became a Sith acolyte, Asajj Ventress, was betrayed by her Sith master, Darth Tyrannus, more commonly known as Count Dooku. Dooku betrayed Asajj. Asajj returned to her home to ask Talzin and her sisters for help in getting revenge. As proof that their society wasn't as powerful as it once was, Talzin worked with a male Zabrak, Savage Opress. Savage was sent to become Dooku's new acolyte, gaining his trust until he could betray the Sith and kill him. When the plot failed, Dooku sent the twisted separatist General Grievous with a massive contingent of battle droids to wipe out the ancient order of witches. The Nightsisters used their magic to fight back and did what they could to stand their ground, but their society was slaughtered, nearly making the Nightsisters of Dathomir extinct. Some individuals lived on, scattered throughout the galaxy. A powerful trio known as the Great Mothers lived outside the primary galaxy, on that planet Peridia we talked about. The Nightsisters who met their end on Dathomir remained in a spectral form until the young Jedi Padawan Ezra Bridger destroyed the sacred altar that held their essence. Check out this transmission next for more Force wielders in the Star Wars galaxy.